Welcome to Historically Speaking. Our episode this month is going to look at F. Scott Fitzgerald's monumental novel, The Great Gatsby, which has just turned 100. This novel has had a lot of publicity this year, which in many ways would have delighted F. Scott Fitzgerald, who died, unfortunately, thinking that people would have forgotten this novel. The first thing that we're going to be looking at is the cover of the novel. This is the original cover as painted and designed by Francis Cugat. It's a very, very edgy cover that kind of captures the gaudy glow of the city lights, the eyes that you can see there, a tear falling down. And the title of The Great Gatsby is one that took several evolutions before landing on this one. The painting itself was called Celestial Eyes, and among the two earlier perspective titles that Fitzgerald proposed was Among the Ash Heaps and Millionaires, that doesn't really roll off the tongue, or Trimalchio in West Egg. And in order to understand that illusion, you would have to know that Trimalchio was a character in a Roman satire, Satricon by Pretonius, but it's a little too pretentious to have used that as a title. I have had many years of experience with this book. I read it when I was in high school, did not like it. And as I think back on it now, I simply, at 17 years old, did not have enough life experience to understand all that is within the book. In my years teaching American Studies, I had 30 road trips with The Great Gatsby, enjoyed teaching it every year because I could connect it with the Roaring Twenties. And one of the reasons why it is such a good book to study along with American history is it's really a time capsule of so many events in the 1920s. So before we get into some specifics of F. Scott Fitzgerald's life, which has a direct relevance to the book, let me just give you an overview of some of the larger themes in the book. The Roaring Twenties and everything that we think of that culture is a reaction to World War I and how people departed from usual social norms as a reaction to all of the wartime experiences that they've had. The three principal characters in the book that I'll say more about in a moment all served in World War I. One of the things that is a dominant motif in the book is prohibition. And the dark side of prohibition was with organized crime. Advertising is another main key concept in the book, as we'll see at the beginning of chapter 2. Movies were all the rage. Flappers. We also have a lot of racism in the 1920s, xenophobia, fear of foreigners. We have class struggles played out in the book. We have old money versus the nouveau riche, and we have people that are barely making it. We also have a real kaleidoscope of American values. It is very much satirizing some of the common held beliefs of the time. We have a romance in the story, a tragic romance, and ultimately what makes Gatsby a truly memorable novel is that the title character himself, J. Gatsby, is a tragic hero. And a tragic hero, as described in Greek tragedy from over 2 millennia ago, is someone who is larger than life, that has a certain amount of nobleness that distinguishes him from above the crowd, but at the same time there is a tragic flaw within him that brings the character down. And all of you know the plot line of The Gatsby by now to know that this would be true. Let's begin by looking at some elements of F. Scott Fitzgerald's life. Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald was born in 1896 in St. Paul, Minnesota. And he has a claim to historical fame because Francis Scott Key, the author of the Star-Spangled Banner, was a great-grand-uncle. But as part of F. Scott Fitzgerald's social aspirations, he didn't want to go through life known as Frank Fitzgerald, so F. Scott Fitzgerald sounds a little bit more waspy than Frank Fitzgerald. He died at the age of 44 in Hollywood, California. I will tell more about that. But to sum up his significance as an author, he is the most articulate spokesman of the jazz age. He attended Princeton University. I choose the words carefully here because he did not finish Princeton University. Very talented, did a lot of writing while there, and he left to enlist in World War I. He did not go overseas. He spent much of the war in Alabama, where he would meet his future wife. He published in 1920 his first collection of short stories called This Side of Paradise. I enjoy teaching them. One of my favorite stories in this collection is Bernice Bobs Her Hair, about a young woman who defied social convention by cutting off her long hair and going to a barber shop and getting the fashionable bob. He married Zelda Sayre in 1920. He first met Zelda when he was stationed in Alabama. Zelda was very much a Southern belle, and one of the things that Scott Fitzgerald had to do in order to make himself a worthwhile candidate for Zelda to marry, he needed to earn money first. You'll see how that plays out in The Great Gatsby. He certainly had matinee looks, as we can see in this profile image, a publicity still from the Scribner Publication Company. The couple had only one child named Scotty, and here they are, Zelda pregnant with their only child in 1921. And here is a family shot of the couple in 1925, in the year that The Great Gatsby was published. They were certainly a high-flying couple, very much at the forefront of roaring 20s culture. They lived fast, they drank, they partied, they spent a lot of money living in hotel suites, and very much they epitomized the roaring 20s, very much a party culture. And when their money started to run dry a little bit, they, like Ernest Hemingway, who had many sparring episodes with F. Scott Fitzgerald, they went to Paris to live where it was a little bit less expensive. Tragedy soon stalked the family because Zelda, by about 1930, descended into mental illness. One of the things that she just wore herself out with is that she tried to be a ballet dancer. Their marriage fell apart. Fitzgerald himself succumbed to alcoholism, and Zelda was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Very, very talented person. Zelda has writing that was published, and this is a self-portrait of Zelda. As Fitzgerald's career fell apart and people were not buying his novels anymore, he spent his last days in Hollywood as a screenwriter, which was certainly a fall from grace of a man who was the epitome of 1920s literary culture. And he gave up drinking, but sadly, just 2 weeks after he was sober, he suffered a fatal heart attack and died at the age of 44. And with Zelda, it's even more sad because Zelda was confined to a mental hospital in Asheville, North Carolina, and the hospital burned in 1948. And Zelda perished along with 9 other people, and the only thing that remained of Zelda to identify her was a slipper. Here is the Fitzgerald's gravestone in Maryland with their full names and dates. And as you can see, we have the last line of the novel, "So we beat on boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past." And one thing I would like to just mention in this biography section is that their granddaughter lived in Burlington, Vermont for a while, and Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda's great-granddaughter is Blake Hazard, a Vermont musician, and I have had the opportunity to meet some members of the Hazard family. Went up to one of them, told him that I was a teacher, and wanted to shake his hand so I could tell my students that I shook the hand of F. Scott Fitzgerald's great-grandson. When the book was published in 1925, it was reviewed in the Rutland Herald. Here is some snippets of that review. For my opinion, it was just too much of a plot revelation. Part of when you read a book for the first time, you would like to know what happens. You don't want to know the ending of the book before it begins. This review tells all here. And the other interesting thing is that within a year, The Great Gatsby was made into a film. A pretty dreadful movie, the only thing that survives, and this is an indication of how many silent films have been lost. Something like 60 to 70% of silent films have deteriorated. So we will be seeing momentarily the only thing that is left from the first movie version of The Great Gatsby from 1926 is the trailer from the movie. Here are some ads from the Rutland Herald of when the Great Gatsby movie was playing at our own movie houses. And here you can see the description on the right. The Great Gatsby, a brilliant social satire focused on the tragedy of a fascinating character, J. Gatsby, soldier, mysterious individual and lover, was shown on the screen at the Strand yesterday and will be continued today. So now let's get into the book and an overview of our main characters. Nick Carraway is the narrator of the novel. And let me just skip over to Tom Buchanan, who is married to Nick's cousin Daisy, and then Gatsby himself. And one of the things that is important to realize with each of these male characters, there's a little bit of Fitzgerald in each one of them. So we have Jordan Baker, who would be Nick's girlfriend. She is a love interest. We have someone who is not even human is an important idea in the novel, and this is a billboard of a wild wag of an oculist from Queens called Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. And then we have Tom Wilson's mistress, Myrtle, who is married to George Wilson, a garage owner. And then we really don't meet Gatsby until about a third of the way through the novel. And in this holding off on actually meeting Gatsby and building up the mysteriousness of this character, This is an element of classical Greek tragic hero that you talk about the character, you build him up before that character appears on stage. And a minor but potent character in the book is Meyer Wolfsheim, who is Gatsby's business partner. And then we have the main settings of the novel, East Egg and West Egg, which are little peninsulas mimicking real settings in Long Island. East Egg is where the old money lived, and West Egg was where the nouveau riche lived. And then as you proceed along the Long Island Railroad going into New York City, we have the very gritty industrial area that is called the Valley of the Ashes. And apropos of our background that you saw at the beginning of the show, we have some of the action taking place in New York City. And one more nod to the originality of the script. One of the criticisms of Great Gatsby is that he wears a pink shirt. As I think about this novel all these years later, one of the things that endures for me is what a very fine writer F. Scott Fitzgerald is. And as I have reread the novel yet one more time in preparation for our show today, I feel so strongly about it now and picking up so much more that I am going to recommend this to my book group in the fall. Here we have the opening lines of the novel, the voice of Nick Carraway. In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you have had. Nick is the moral voice of the novel. And as I recommend to all of you, if you haven't read it since high school, go back and reread the novel. And then after you have finished the novel, go back to these opening paragraphs and you'll have a sense that Nick is telling the story here long after the fact. Part of the wonder of F. Scott Fitzgerald's descriptions when he meets his acquaintance, Tom Buchanan, an important person in the story because Tom Buchanan is married to Gatsby's great love. And here is the description. He has changed since his New Haven years, reference to Yale. Now he was a sturdy, straw-haired man of 30 with a hard mouth and a supercilious manner. And you can tell that when I was teaching the novel, there's wonderful vocabulary words here, and I couldn't unhighlight supercilious. Two shining, arrogant eyes had established dominance over his face and gave him the appearance of always leaning aggressively forward. Not even the effeminate swank of his riding clothes could hide the enormous power of that body, skipping to the end, a cruel body. And we know that one of the very cruel things that Tom Buchanan does is when he is at his love nest with his mistress, Myrtle, who is also cheating on her husband. She comes out into the room chanting Tom's wife's name, Daisy, Daisy, Daisy. I'll say it whenever I want. And Tom Buchanan, with his hulking power, smacks her in the nose, causing a nosebleed. Here is as chapter 2 begins, a description of a relevant piece of the plot, the Valley of the Ashes. The Valley of the Ashes, a fantastic farm where ashes grow like wheat into ridges and hills and grotesque gardens, where ashes take the form of houses and chimneys, rising smoke, and finally a transcendent effort of men who move dimly and already crumbling through the powdery air. And skipping a few lines, after a moment, the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg, the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg are blue and gigantic. their irises 1 yard high. They look out over no face, but instead from a pair of enormous yellow spectacles against which pass over a non-existent nose. Evidently, some wild wag of an oculist set them there to fatten his practice in the borough of Queens. So this is an advertising billboard that is kind of evoked in that cover art of Gatsby. But what happens in the novel that hastens the ultimate tragedy, the husband of Myrtle Wilson, after his wife has been killed, looks out towards the billboard and thinks that it's the eyes of God that are watching him, prompting him to avenge the death of his wife. When you've seen various movie versions of The Great Gatsby, all of them to a lesser or a greater degree capture the roaring, raucous party culture of the 1920s, all of which is taking place during Prohibition. And the Gatsby parties have hundreds of people attending them. So one or two sentences that I'll read on this is, on weekends, his Rolls-Royce became an omnibus bearing parties to and from the city between 9 in the morning and long past midnight, while his station wagon scampered like a brisk yellow bug to meet all the trains. Every Friday, 5 crates of oranges and lemons arrived from a fruitier in New York. Every Monday, these same oranges and lemons left his back door in a pyramid of pulpless halves. So why all of these parties? That will become clear in a moment. And this is where we have one of the themes of the book coming out about Tom Buchanan and his wife Daisy. And Tom Buchanan is the voice of conservative, waspy values, where he says, civilization is going to pieces, broke out Tom violently. I've gotten to be a terrible pessimist about things. Have you read The Rise of the Colored Empires by this man Goddard? Why, no, I answered. This is Nick, rather surprised by his tone. Well, it's a fine book, and everybody ought to read it. The idea is if we don't look out, the white race will be utterly submerged. It's all scientific stuff. It's been proved. So here we have this ugly side of the 1920s, very, very racist, and this is part of Fitzgerald's building of Tom Buchanan as an unlikable, hypocritical character. We have a description now of Daisy and the fact that she has this kind of voice that follows your ear up and down. Her face was sad and lovely with bright things in it, bright eyes, and a bright, passionate mouth. But there was an excitement in her voice that men who cared for her found difficult to forget. A singing compulsion, a whispered listen, a promise that she had gone gay, exciting things, just a wild sense that they were gay, exciting things hovering in the next hour. And one of the things that we have happening in this novel is that the main characters all decide, because it's very hot at the house in Long Island, they go into the city where they have primitive air conditioning at the Plaza Hotel. And this is where Gatsby, who has presented all of these parties to win back Daisy, whom he fell in love with, but when he didn't have any money. In the meantime, Daisy married Tom Buchanan, and at this point, Gatsby expects Daisy to leave her husband, which she is not about to do. So in this confrontation, what happens is that Daisy and Gatsby get in a car and they start to head home. The others follow. But what happens is when Gatsby, who is driving Tom's car, stops at the gas station. Myrtle, who is Tom's mistress, runs out into the road. She is hit and fatally struck down when Daisy is driving, but Gatsby takes the blame. And this is ultimately what causes Daisy's husband, George Wilson, to go out and shoot Gatsby and then shoot himself. And Tom Buchanan knew that his wife was driving the car, but he allowed the man to think that it was Gatsby who was driving. And one of the things that I would like to, and again, trying to crunch a whole novel into a short presentation, is that Gatsby's whole persona was a significant departure into fiction. And he was really born in the Midwest as a poor farm boy named James Gatz. And here is what Nick has to say about this. I suppose he had had the name ready for a long time, even then. His parents were shiftless and unsuccessful farm people. His imagination had never really accepted them as parents at all. The truth was that J. Gatsby of West Egg, Long Island, sprang from his platonic conception of himself. He was a son of a god, a phrase which it means anything that he must be about his father's business, the service of a vast, vulgar, and meretricious beauty. So Gatsby is built, his whole persona is built on a lie that he would attempt to turn himself into something that he wasn't to win over his lost love, Daisy, which ultimately proves abortive and tragic. And I think one of the things that really speaks to Gatsby's delusion is that Nick cautions him, I wouldn't ask too much of her, meaning that Daisy is going to leave her husband and go with Gatsby. Nick says, you can't repeat the past. Gatsby says, can't repeat the past? He cried incredulously. Why, of course you can. And this is where we have the ultimate tragedy of the novel. And reading the last lines here, which again is also carved in stone on the Fitzgerald's grave, Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster and stretch out our arms in one fine morning. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. For a lot of people who may not have read the book, we have images from film of Great Gatsby. So I would like to close out our presentation today with a brief overview of the various films that have been made about Gatsby. The first one in 1926 that does not survive. And then we have a really wild, divergent interpretation of the film from 1948 that totally aborts everything that's in the book. Here you can see Alan Ladd, looking more like a gum show, is playing Gatsby. It is, of all the various versions of the story, this is the one that is most far-fetched. At least Scott Fitzgerald didn't have to live to see this one. The version that many of us grew up with is the 1974 version of The Great Gatsby, with Robert Redford in the title role and Mia Farrow. And it's a pretty faithful adaptation of the novel, with many things looking like they stepped right out of the pages of the book. The part that is An additional scene is the whole meeting of Nick Carraway and Gatsby, which takes place in this movie version in a way that was not any way near the way it was portrayed in the book. There was a television version of Great Gatsby, and again, the locale and the characters were nicely presented, but a lot of liberties with the book. And the person who played Gatsby in this instance was Toby Stephens, who is Maggie Stevens' son. And then more recently, we have Leonardo DiCaprio in The Great Gatsby, made that not long ago. And this one really put my teeth on edge because there are just so many distortions of the book, the music, the plot line, and the greatest nail in the coffin for me in this version is that Nick, who is the moral center of the book, they have him speaking from an insane asylum. Oh, what a tragedy that happened with that script. And also, it's worthwhile to mention that The Great Gatsby is a musical on Broadway. But no matter whether a movie adaptation or the musical, read the book. It's very worthwhile. And I guarantee that if you haven't read it since high school, you will get a whole lot more out of it. Thank you.